Let me ask you a question, and I want you to sit with it honestly before you answer. If someone walked up to you in your 50s and offered to hand you a check that would cover your entire retirement, everything you need to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but there was one condition: you had to say no to the next big financial request that came your way, whatever it was, could you do it? Most people instinctively say yes. Of course, that is an easy trade. But here is what I have watched over a lifetime of knowing people at every income level and every stage of life. When that request actually arrives, dressed in love, dressed in loyalty, dressed in the language of family and obligation and decency, almost nobody says no. And that single inability to say no in your 50s is the one decision I have watched destroy more retirements silently and completely than any market crash, any bad investment, any financial mistake I can name. Today I want to talk about that decision, not to make you feel guilty, but to make sure you understand exactly what it costs before it arrives at your door. Your 50s are not just another decade. They are the most financially consequential decade of your life, if you understand how to use them. This is typically when your income is at its peak, your house is closer to paid off, your children, if you have them, are closer to independence, your career is established, and for the first time in your adult life, a significant portion of what you earn can actually be redirected toward building the financial foundation that will carry you through the next 30 or 40 years. I have met people who arrived at 50 with almost nothing saved and still managed to build genuine security in the following decade because they understood what was available to them during those years. The math still works at 50 if you use the decade correctly, but it only works if you protect it. And the thing that most commonly destroys those years is not a bad investment or a market downturn. It is the slow, quiet, emotionally justified drain of helping people you love at the direct expense of helping yourself. Let me be specific because I think vague warnings are useless. The decision I am describing looks like this. Your adult child needs help with a down payment on a house. Your son or daughter is struggling with student loans, and you have the money to make their life easier. A family member needs a loan that everyone understands is really a gift. A sibling is going through a hard time and needs support. Your grandchildren need things that their parents cannot fully provide. Your parents need financial help in their old age. Every single one of these situations is real, and every single one of them pulls at something genuinely good in you. The desire to protect the people you love is not a character flaw. It is one of the best things about being human. But in your 50s, acting on that desire with money that belongs to your retirement is one of the most expensive things you can do. Not just for you, eventually for the very people you are trying to help. Here is the math that I think people need to see clearly. Say you are 55 years old and you have managed to save $100,000. Not a fortune, but a real foundation. That money, invested simply in a broad index fund at an average 10% return, will grow to over $670,000 by the time you are 85. That is 30 years of compounding, turning 100,000 into something that can genuinely sustain a life. Now say your child comes to you and needs $40,000 for a down payment. You have it. They need it. It feels like the right thing to do, so you give it. Now you have $60,000, and that $60,000 grows to a little over $400,000 by the same age. You just gave away not $40,000. You gave away $270,000 of retirement income because that is what $40,000 compounding for 30 years actually represents. You gave it away for entirely understandable reasons, with a full heart, and you will probably never fully understand what it cost you until you are in your 70s, wondering why the money is running out. I want to introduce a concept here that I call the invisible bill. Every time you redirect retirement money towards someone else's needs in your 50s, you are paying a bill. But this bill does not arrive immediately. It arrives 15 or 20 years later, quietly, in the form of reduced income, reduced options, reduced security. It arrives when you cannot take a health issue seriously because you cannot afford the treatment. It arrives when you cannot afford to stop working, even though your body is telling you it is time to stop. It arrives when you become the financial burden on the next generation that you were trying to help. People very rarely connect the decision they made at 55 to the financial stress they are experiencing at 75. The gap is too long. The logic is too indirect. But the math does not care about the gap. The math runs in the background, silently, every single year, compounding the cost of that invisible bill until the day it finally lands. Now, I want to address something that I know a lot of people are thinking right now. Warren, this sounds cold. This sounds like you are telling me to choose money over family. And I understand why it sounds that way. But that is not what I am saying. What I am saying is that in your 50s, financial generosity toward others must be weighed with absolute honesty against the financial reality of your own situation. And in my experience, most people are not doing that weighing. They are leading with their heart, which is admirable, and then discovering too late that the heart led them somewhere their finances could not follow. I have said for years that you should leave your children enough to do anything, but not so much that they do nothing. But the flip side of that is equally true. You cannot give your children what you do not have. And if you spend your 50s giving away the foundation of your own security, you may spend your 80s depending on those same children to survive. That is not a gift to them. That is a different kind of burden, delivered with a longer delay. Let me give you the clearest picture I can. I have known two men who reached 50 with similar financial situations. Both had savings, both had decent incomes, both had adult children who needed help at various points during their 50s. The first man, every time a need arose in his family, responded by opening his account. He helped with down payments. He covered college debt. He took a loan request from his brother that became permanent. He paid for his grandchildren's private school because he wanted to give them advantages. None of these decisions were reckless in isolation. Together, they drained a decade of peak earning years. By 65, he had almost nothing invested and was completely dependent on Social Security and whatever part-time work he could still manage. The second man made one rule in his 50s and kept it without exception. He told his family honestly, "I love you and I will always be here for you, but I will not compromise my retirement to give you money. If I have extra, I will share it, but I will not take from the foundation." By 65, he had built enough to genuinely stop working and help his family far more meaningfully than he ever could have during his 50s. He bought his grandchildren things. He helped with real emergencies. He had resources because he protected the decade that made resources possible. I know which man most people want to be, and I know that in the moment, when the request arrives and the person you love is standing in front of you, being the second man is genuinely hard. It requires saying something that feels selfish, even when it is actually the most generous long-term decision you can make. But here is what I want you to hold on to. The most loving thing you can do for the people in your life right now, in your 50s, is to not become their financial problem later, to not be the person they have to worry about at 75, when you should be the person they can lean on, to not drain your retirement giving them things today that leave you unable to give them anything in 20 years. That is not coldness, that is clarity. And clarity in your 50s is worth more than any gift you can write a check for today. So here is what I am asking you to do before this video ends. Make the rule now, before the next request arrives, because it will arrive. Decide what your line is. Decide how much you can give without touching the foundation. And then hold that line even when it is uncomfortable, even when it feels selfish, even when the person asking you makes you feel like the worst human being alive for saying no. Because the version of you that exists at 75 will either thank you for that decision or pay the full cost of not making it. The game in your 50s is not about being generous with today. It is about being solvent enough to still be generous at 80. That is the real gift. That is all.